to stick to the protocol. This protocol has managed to square the difficult circle that Brexit caused.
The United States and China have issued a joint statement at the COP26 climate summit saying they want to accelerate action against climate change this decade. Describing the 2020s as critical, they're pledging to cut methane emissions, phase out coal power and reduce deforestation. Speaking in Glasgow, US Secretary of State John Kerry said the coming decade would be critical.
This declaration includes strong statements about the alarming science, the emissions gap, and the urgent need to accelerate the action to close that gap.
The Chief Medical Officer says he's not expecting a return of COVID restrictions despite the rapid rise in cases. 2,975 people tested positive as of today. Infections have been increasing threefold among 19 to 24-year-olds over the last 2 weeks, with the situation worsening in all counties. Dr Tony Houlihan says another lockdown isn't being considered right now.
I mean, the word restrictions is a broad word. If by that you mean the closure of economic and social activities, the closure of certain sectors or segments of society. Nobody is ruling out things like that anywhere, but at the same time, no one has an expectation that we're going to go back into that kind of environment at this point in time.
And the charity Inner City Helping Homeless is to stop providing services from next Monday. Liquidator KPMG informed volunteers today and said other services in the capital are ready for an increase in demand. It follows the death by suicide of its founder, Councillor Ansley Flynn, following the revelation that Gardaí were investigating complaints of sexual assault against him. That's it for now. More in an hour.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Book your Christmas winter sunbreak in Lanzarote, Tenerife and Gran Canaria.
Most parts dry tonight under broken cloud with mist and fog forming. Some patchy drizzle in southern areas though, turning chilly with lows of 1 to 6 degrees. Now you're up to date on News Talk.
Your chance to win big. News Talk's cash machine.
So the winning streak continues. We have had another winner in the News Talk cash machine. Congrats to Noel Dignam, who knew the correct amount today was €4,736.98 when we called him just after 3 o'clock this afternoon. And we'll be adding a new amount to the cash machine tomorrow. Make sure you're listening at 8 tomorrow morning to News Talk Breakfast when Shane and Ciara will give you tomorrow's total.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now you're very welcome along. We have much to discuss. Very happy to welcome in Gordon D'Arcy once again. Hey Gordon.
How you doing? How you doing, Joe?
Very well. And look, he doesn't really come on when the URC's on. He's not really about that, you know. And even kind of Champions Cup matches, he's him and Han. Maybe sometimes the odd time. A match against the All Blacks. Andy Dunne, that's when you kind of make yourself available. So we're honoured to have an audience with you. Hello.
Thanks, Joe. It's cold up here on my perch, but
you've got great hair.
So before we get into the game on Saturday, I just want to start with the situation surrounding the women's team this week, because otherwise time could get away from us. And this is a very important story and kind of extraordinary, really. So Adam Griggs, as he says farewell, is overseeing these final 2 matches. The first being on Friday at the RDS, under lights, 7:45, crowd in attendance. Should be, you know, an exciting time and a World Cup to look forward to, and that should be the general tone of this match. Instead, it seems like the relationship between players, former players, and the IRFU is toxic at this stage. So Adam Griggs has been naming the team and saying, look, it's a first test, all those points I mentioned, RDS, under lights, it's going to be a special occasion. The backdrop, however, if people miss this, is that Anthony Eddy, the IRFU Director of Women's and Sevens Rugby, gave an interview to not just one news outlet, press across the board this week. And it's been roundly attacked, I would say, by numerous players and former players. So, for instance, to give you a sense of what's been said, Cliona Maloney, who does, by the way, start the game on Friday, she described his interview as slurry spreading. Claire Malloy, recently retired, obviously, slammed it, cited a lack of accountability and put all the blame on the players. Jenny Murphy used the word spineless about it and added on Twitter, she wished she was more surprised at this take from Eddie, but I'm not. Is this the voice of someone who cares about the women's game in this country? And on it goes. Rory O'Connor was on the back page of the Irish Independent this morning, and he reported that the comments, Anthony Eddy's interview, that is, were understood to have gone down badly within the squad. Cohort of the players wanted to go public. However, they didn't have the full support of the squad, so they've kept their counsel, I guess. Cliona Maloney, you could say, has broken ranks with the slurry comment and gone public. Anthony Eddy, appointed December 2014. That was the year Ireland reached the World Cup semi-final. They did win a Six Nations the following year. They'd won the Grand Slam in 13. Now no World Cup for the first time since 91. And a general sense, really, of regression over the last number of years. Just to briefly surmise his interview and give you a sense of what he was talking about, he said he didn't want to, on the World Cup disappointment, contaminate any findings from the review going too in depth this week. So there are 2 reviews underway, one into the World Cup failure and a second report which is a root and branch look at the game, AIL, right down to grassroots pathways, a full look at the women's game. So those 2 reports are happening and we should hear about them in the next 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks or so. But what he did say, so for instance, he cited the big issue as player depth in the country, and we're trying to fast track talent currently. Talked about changes which are going to be made to the AIL maybe at the end of this year. Participation numbers, quality competition, the big 2 things for him that he's focused on going forward. He was asked about the general sense, I think, out there that the 7s has been favoured over the 15s. He was very strongly against that point. He said that's incorrect. Both programmes received a lot of resources. He said there were 9 full contracted players in Parma at this World Cup qualifying event recently. 9 of those players were full contracted players. And he said as well, 3 full-time IRFU coaching staff. He said because of small playing numbers, that the pool of players has to be shared. He said people who say one programme is being favoured, they are wrong. And he was asked about concerns balancing 2 codes, detracting from both. He said no, and he cited players like Jasmine Joyce with Wales and others as examples of players who play in both codes with different countries. On the World Cup disappointment, he said, concerned, disappointing, to be honest. The group of players we have in both forms of the game are capable of achieving higher standards than what we are at the moment. Talked about wanting to get the player base up from kind of 1,200, 1,600 senior players up to 6, 7, 8,000 by kind of next World Cup territory. He said unions much smaller than us have a larger player base. And then, I don't know, maybe this is the comment that annoyed the players in particular. Further on the World Cup disappointment, he said the players were all prepared, knowing what the other programmes did, as in the programmes elsewhere. I think our squad and our programme was actually a lot more advanced than what the other unions did. We were training and still operating through lockdowns and everything else because of what we had put in place to try and qualify. The group may have put a lot of pressure on themselves around the actual performances, and that could have affected the way they actually played. Unfortunate to lose the 2 games on full time with unfortunate errors that cost them 2 games they probably shouldn't have lost. That's probably it at the moment. So that's a fairly blunt summation of what was a kind of long exchange with the media. Gordon, your reaction to, I suppose, anything Anthony Eddy had to say, and then to say the least, strong reaction from the players.
Yeah, Anthony Eddy has been all over any sort of mild success around women's rugby, and he's out in front, and it's all we. He's talking about they and them in that, and that's the contempt for women's rugby, and in women's rugby where we have to be, it's not equal, it's not treated on par. To be a man in that arena and to talk like that language in there is completely dismissive of women's rugby. But to be honest, I'm not surprised, because I suppose the guy who hired him, he kind of echoes an awful lot of the approach that he takes. So I'm not surprised by anything he's really said in this. And I looked, I have the interview here, and I'm looking through it. There's so much hyperbole in this, and there's so little actual tangible action points and everything. We're almost going to end up in the Tory government here, where we're going to talk about all these great actions and plans, and this is going to be thing, and we've this and that. And yes, the Irish team was better funded at the elite level than the teams we lost to in the World Cup qualifiers. And the players will need to take that piece of responsibility if they want to be treated as elite athletes. And they will do that, and I'm sure they are doing that and learning all the lessons and all that kind of crack from it. But the rest of the women's rugby is in complete disarray. And I found an interview from David Newsifore in February of 2019, and it's almost like Anthony Eddy took the main points from that interview and rehashed them in this one. But they said the same thing, which is very, very little in contextual or anything tangible. And nothing has been done in almost 18 months.
Yeah. On the 18 months front, I suppose the pandemic hasn't helped, but I do take your point. Anthony Eddy's not here to defend himself.
I would actually say
it's a time to do it.
If you wanted a better time when rugby is stopped in women's rugby, and treat women's rugby it's an easier problem to solve than the men's game, just purely because there's less participation. So why can't you actually organise structures that, if you're saying, if we put structures in place now, organise the AIL, organise the provinces, organise the international, organise the sevens in a coherent strategy and invest at the grassroots level, which, like, throwing money at the top of it, if you don't have players in it, is, staying in a nice hotel does not help you win games. Mm-hmm. Okay? Having skilled players coming right the way through grassroots. So, as we say, this is, if you were asking for a better time, stop Irish rugby for women's Irish rugby, men's rugby, whatever it is, and plan and coherent and go for it. But it lacks will, it lacks cohesion, it lacks so many things.
Okay. Just to make a point, Anthony Eddy's not here to defend himself, so I would make the point, he would refute the line that he has contempt for the women's game. He would say he's working in the women's game and he's doing his very best. So let's just put that on record for a moment. And
he used in that interview it's distancing himself from the result.
Fair enough. I take that point. And Andy, I bring you in this. He might argue as well, we have commissioned 2 very serious reports. We have brought in Amanda Bennett to oversee those reports. They will look at 1, the World Cup failure. They will look at 2, root and branch, look at the game from AIL right down to grassroots. And he said a lot of those findings will be made public. So he would again argue that he's more than doing his bit. Where are you on all this?
I think root and branch reviews are, they tend to be full of management speak, corporate language. They mention stakeholders. I know D'Arcy himself was, he was involved, not personally involved, but by being involved in the Irish team. I think after one of the World Cup failures, I think it was 2007, there was one of these huge reviews done by the IRFU. I'm not sure a huge amount changed as a result of these reviews. I mean, they're done for transparency, and they're done for, I suppose they're done to show some degree of accountability and to say, right, what is the role and responsibility of the IRFU in developing the game, and where have we got it wrong? So any kind of organisational root and branch review, grassroots, stakeholders, all these buzzwords get thrown around. Unless there's actually practical and pragmatic changes made on the back of one of these reviews, they're pointless. So I think there's a couple of things that are, there's a lot of things that are worrying in the women's game at the moment. Obviously, you mentioned, Joe, that decline since 2013 in performances and in I suppose win ratio, just general success has been on the decline. There's clearly a significant lack of depth in overall numbers in the game nationwide, and that's a huge issue, as D'Arcy mentioned. But then it's obviously it started to spill over into the senior team at the moment, where there's a clear, it looks like Cliona Maloney has kind of gone rogue, I suppose. And in any top level sports team, international level, you'd like to think, regardless of the frustrations or the anger that are there, that someone doesn't break rank from the rest of the team or it doesn't cause a divide. I mean, I've heard a couple of players come out today and they're much more towing the party line, saying, look, we do have to take some responsibility for our performance, but also the IRFU need to improve what they're doing in a general support for the women's game. But I did think to a degree that the comments from, I can understand the comments from former players. I think they're probably a little more, they're probably in a more appropriate position to do. But when current players do it, it gets quite distracting for the team itself with a game match. It's happening this week, obviously. So that's something that just concerned me about their current group, and the morale in that group and the leadership in that group. That would concern me just on an immediate level. But then there are obviously deeper issues that are causing that level of anger. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. On that point, Gordon, the whole thing has gone incredibly toxic when you've got the starting hooker from Friday's game coming out publicly and saying that Anthony Eddy is slurry spreading. You know, the IRFU director of women's and sevens rugby is slurry spreading. Like this. Well, I'm wary of using the phrase all-time low, but it can't be far off it at the moment. So I don't know. In the immediate term, whatever about these reports, relations just have to be repaired here, and goodwill has to be fostered here somehow.
Well, are they repairable? And I think that's got to be the question. And there has to be some sort of accountability at some point in this system. And like Anthony Eddy, you can't just go on record like this, and there can be no consequence, no accountability to it. So the women are obviously feeling that they're not being listened to, and quite a flippant remark. And I completely agree with Andy on this. Unless a report, and again the 2019 report, again, from the World Cup, what was the takeaway from that? Nobody knows. Nobody's any of the way the wiser. For David Nusafora when he released that statement, when he released the review, said his answer to it, who's seen it, was all the players, all the people who need to see it have seen it. And somebody asked to say, who is that? And he reiterated the same sentence to say, all the right people have seen it. Now, transparency in this case, unless you're going to come out and say, these are the actions, this is what we have said needs to be fixed, and these are the timelines we think they can be fixed in, and somebody could hold accountable. But that's not going to happen, because that's not what happens in Irish rugby at the moment, at this level.
I would say that the appointment, they've made a new appointment with Greg McWilliams to come in. If anything, that's going to be a huge leap forward in my view. I know Greg as a coach for a long time now. He's hugely passionate. He's one of these. He's totally immersed in the game. He can't stop thinking about it. He can't stop talking about it. He's got very good people skills. He's very, very clear on how he wants his teams to play. He was involved in the US Eagles for the last couple of years as an attack coach. And in the couple of times I've spoken to him in recent years, I suppose ironically on the week we've just had, he really tried to set up his teams to play like, if we can peak Japan teams, if we talk about the 2019 World Cup, teams that are full of speed, movement, high skill level, high execution. And when you look at the Japanese men's rugby, for example, where there's always that underdog status, there's definitely, they don't have as many numbers playing rugby in Japan as they compared to the level of interest in the J League and soccer. So he's looking at, to me, he looks like a really, really good fit and a really smart appointment that hopefully in 6 months or a year, we're looking at an Irish team that are suddenly crawling their way back out of this real low point this week. And maybe people are focusing on good performances, a more successful feel-good factor around the squad. And perhaps this, the buzzwords of the root and branch stakeholders, grassroots review actually has some practical takeaways, but that remains to be seen. I do think in terms of tangible change, I think Greg McWilliams is a super addition to the women's game. Okay,
we'll come back to that, I suspect, many times over. Let's turn to Ireland against New Zealand, 3:15 on Saturday. Gordon, couldn't help but think of you as I watched Ireland put up a cricket score against Japan, because your sense or your fear last week was that this would be tight-ish and Ireland would have been fairly similar in approach to what we've become accustomed to, whereas on both fronts it was a very pleasant surprise.
Yeah, and in my article today in the Irish Times, I happily put my hand up and said I got it wrong. You look at the information you have at hand, and there was very little to suggest in the last 20 games for Ireland that we had a performance like this in us. And even particularly the way the provinces were going, you wouldn't say this was all culminated into an easy viewpoint. But how nice is it when you get it wrong? And one of the points I was trying to make is that when you're out of the environment within a team, you sometimes in those weeks, just something happens, something clicks, whether, Andy Farrell talked about Jack Conan coming back from the Lions and something seems to have clicked in him. I don't think anything's clicked. I just think he's uninjured, but he's adding something into that game. You're looking at Doris, Ian Henderson, and timing, onto the ball, your pace onto it. Johnny Sexton, Bundy, Gibson Park, putting the ball into space and forcing players to run onto it. All these little intangible things come together, and suddenly you get a first 40, 50, 60 minutes like that from Ireland. And while Japan were poor for large parts of the game, for me, in most part, they were poor because Ireland never let them breathe. They starved them on possession. When they gave them possession, and then usually forced them to either cough it up or to kick it back to them when Ireland wanted it back rather than what Japan wanted to do. So Japan were chasing shadows and Ireland were largely creating the shadows for them to change. So you couldn't be happier. And again, when you do kind of forecast a grey sky on the horizon, how nice is it to go, great, got that one absolutely, couldn't have got it any further wrong. And happy to stick your hand up and go, listen, now we get to try it again.
To be fair, I think everyone got it wrong, really. Nobody quite saw this coming. 18 offloads and 14 line breaks, and just the general style and adventure to the performance. So Andy Dunne, I feel like you've been waiting on this kind of performance a long time, a very long time. How different will it be against New Zealand is the really interesting question now. And that's a twofold question. One, will Ireland show the same ambition and just say, well, we're going to make mistakes, and against New Zealand they might intercept a try, we might cough up 7 points by trying a certain pass, but to hell with that, we're going to do it anyway. So one, ambition, and two, I presume the All Blacks will just put more pressure on Ireland, and therefore will it even be possible to play that way? So your sense of how different the game on Saturday is going to be?
I feel my preferred option would be we play with the exact same approach. We play with the same tempo. We play with the same level of risk. That's what would be my preferred option. And I might kind of go back to, we beat New Zealand in 2019 when we were literally on top of the world. I think we went number one ranked at that stage.
18. We definitely didn't beat them in 19.
sorry, 2018. Yeah, just on the tail end of the Grand Slam year. Yeah. And arguably Irish rugby at its kind of maybe one of its greatest moments. And how we beat the All Blacks that day was one or two kind of brilliantly thought out set piece plays, and then this wild level of physicality and commitment to the breakdown, great accuracy at the breakdown, making sure we held on to possession for long periods of time, and having an incredibly aggressive defensive line. So they're all great things in isolation, but that became a pattern of play that we became well known for and well analysed, and ultimately it became it was our downfall, because we couldn't sustain that level of intensity, and we couldn't sustain holding on to the ball for as long as we did, and we couldn't sustain 140 rucks per game. And what I would really like to see us play the exact same way we did against Japan and lose maybe by 10 to 15 points, but having learned more about how we're going to approach the All Blacks if we play them in the next World Cup. I think Andy Farrell is he must be the first Irish manager in the history of Irish rugby who's come out 2 years ahead of a World Cup and said, why can't we talk about winning a World Cup? He said it on record a couple of weeks back. It was so refreshing. It was so refreshing to hear an Irish coach put his head above the parapet and not say, look, the next game is the one that matters and the usual. Because when we do, and we have fallen at repeatedly at World Cups, we go back into, guess what, root and branch reviews and stakeholders and the usual stuff. We haven't actually changed how we're trying to play at any stage meaningfully in the intervening years. He's actually trying to change how we play, along with, obviously with Mike Catt, with Paul O'Connell, John Fogarty. But there's a real clarity and a really distinctive change in the team's approach. So to answer your question, that would be my preferred way for us to play, not to abandon that just because it's the All Blacks for fear of a loss. I suspect and Johnny Sexton's come out and kind of already said, it would be great if we could play like we did against Japan, but we probably won't be able to because the All Blacks greater degree of intensity. But I'd rather us give it a go. It's ultimately a friendly. Like, you can call it whatever you want. It's a friendly. It's not going to be friendly on the field. Well, it's not a Six Nations game. It's not part of an official tournament. It's not part of a make-you-up Nations Cup, and it's certainly not a World Cup game. So why not try and play the same way and learn from it? That would be my choice.
And Gordon, is it possible, because I saw in your piece today in the Irish Times you were calling for the same thing, not to regress and become about damage limitation or regress in terms of ambition. To what extent is it possible against a much, much better team to play the same way as Ireland did against Japan?
Yeah, so in my experience, when you come, where does confidence come from? It's repeatedly doing stuff under pressure, and then when you get to those clutch moments, you get to those big games, you have a bank of experience, you have a bank of confidence that when, say, something doesn't work, you have the clarity to go, just click your fingers, or just to stamp it off and to keep pushing and to keep coming back from it. And that was the point I was talking about, is that they seem to be embracing a more mistake. It's okay to make mistakes, because if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying anything. If you're not trying anything, you're not going to do anything different. The problem with that, though, is the risk reward becomes heightened. The throwing of the offload might be 7 points for you. If it doesn't go to hand, it goes to ground. The All Blacks are incredible about turning turnover ball into points on the board, and that factors into your thinking. The opportunities will be there. We're not going to get the opportunities for 17 or 18 offloads. Might get the opportunity for half that. If we created 12 or 13 scoring opportunities, again, it might be half of that. We just need to keep the same type of efficiency, and I suppose we need to start fast and we need to start early. So we need plays, we need ball to go to hand. So this isn't a game where you build yourself into it and 15, 20 minutes you try something. We kind of have to go from the off, because that can, I suppose, catapult the Irish team and the momentum, and kind of and kick on and and put it back onto the All Blacks. We need to score tries. The All Blacks have scored the most points in a calendar year, and they have 2 games to spare. So we know they're going to score tries. They had a workmanlike score performance against Italy. Like, their forwards just basically pulverised Italy, and against the Wales, I think they only had they'd single figure offloads, 2 intercepts from Bowden Barrett, and just picked tries out of nothing. Individual brilliance. Will Jordan's try was probably one of the highlights of the 2021 rugby season so far. So there's so much that New Zealand can have, but the Irish thing has to be about what can they control, and they have the shape. It's just having the confidence and that psychological security of just going, do you know what, I'm just going to go after this. Gary Ringrose being quite positively selfish for the betterment of the team, because I do think the players have lost. They've kind of given up an awful lot of their individuality for that group approach over previous seasons, and we're starting to see a little bit of that come back in now. And I think Gibson Park getting an awful lot of freedom in that decision making at 9. He threw a few passes. Wanger, didn't go particularly to hand, but his break, his threading that needle pass on the short side for James Lowe's opening try, his Croffield Grubber for Conway's second try. There was so much to be excited about him. And do you know what that was? It was a second playmaker. And you look at who the top players in the world, and Dupont players like that. There is an opportunity for Gibson Park to really, really drive things for Ireland.
Andy, would you like to see any changes to the starting 15?
No, I don't. Not based on last week. I thought that starting 15 were superb. I'm definitely rewatched it, and I'm definitely sitting firmly in the camp it was Irish excellence as opposed to Japanese, Japanese poor play. I think I would echo the things D'Arcy is saying there. They're clearly being given more freedom. They're doing things that are what at 3 seasons ago on the field would have looked like a wild rush of blood to the head. But when you're given license to do that, and players are smart enough at that level and they've enough instinct to react to when something goes wrong as well, you get away with it. When you're rigidly abiding to structured, prescriptive rugby, and someone does something a bit off sync, there's a heightened focus on that. But there were many moments where the ball was a kind of a flailing arm, and a ball was thrown over his shoulder, particularly deep in our own territory. There was a couple of wide, loose passes, 1 or 2 by Gibson Park, but they landed. And for me, it's a far better option than watching 4 more box kicks in the same position. So I think overall, I think we all have short enough memories, but the English game in the Six Nations back in spring was a precursor to this, and that was the game where you'd say there's a lot more at stake. It's a Six Nations match, and I think we deconstructed England. We were brilliant. We had significantly less rucks than our previous yearly average in that game. We were in the high 70s as opposed to 130 zone. We had more offloads in that game. We were generally very creative and we took risks. So we've shown we can do it in a game that's considered high stakes. So I'd love to just see it continue as opposed to shut up shop against the All Blacks. And then the only other side of which probably we haven't spoken about much is that Farrell said the thing that pleased him most about last week was the defence, and that it sounded very like Guardiola or Klopp-esque. As he spoke about defence as how quickly he got the ball back, as opposed to things like line speed, tackle count, and Ireland got the ball back very, very quickly against Japan. So he was clearly happy. He was impressed with that. So our defence is going to be key against these All Blacks, as D'Arcy mentioned. I think 14 games so far this season, and have broken the world record for points scored and tries scored in a calendar year. So they're lethal.
Donner as well. There was the one try that Japan scored came from a transition, and we were slow in that transition going from the attack to defence. Right. And for the rest of the game, it was, as you said, they were very good in the defence. I think that's a nice little positive. That's the early warning for those players coming in on Monday morning, going, listen, guys, brilliant performance. Let's not blow too much smoke up of our ass. But look at this. When we switch off, this is what Japan can do to us. These are the guys who move the ball fast through the hands. They play a tempo. This will do. So very, very similar to what New Zealand will do. New Zealand will punish you in the same way Japan did if you switch off. So it's a good, timely reminder and a good one to have in the bank before, in the build up to this game.
So to begin to wrap this up, time has flown by, as I knew it would, with so much to talk about. Listening to Andy there, he's unequivocal. Gordon, I suspect you're not far behind him. Ireland need to approach this with the same verve and the same ambition that they approached the Japan match with, because this ultimately, come World Cup 2023 and beyond, this is the way, if Ireland are going to take out a big team, this is the way they're going to do it. So you have to road test it against the big boys. There's no point going for a let's cut down on the mistakes here, lads, kind of attitude.
Sorry, Joseph, so the line went bad there for a second. So the attitude, is it for the
yeah?
For the week?
I'll shorten the question for everyone else's sake. They need to road test this type of play, because this is the only way they're ultimately going to beat the All Blacks at a World Cup, for instance.
And listen, I think that's probably that's probably too big of a jump. I think we have France and we have England in Twickenham and in Paris next in less than 5 months' time. So this is a fantastic opportunity to try stuff, see and test people. Like, this is a whole newish looking tight five. I'm not so sure that Ian Henderson doesn't start coming in, and as I said, there is no bad selections in that tight five at the moment. But we need to get these guys. Can they deliver against the All Blacks? Can Johnny Sexton, and who is going to, is this the game to get Harry Byrne in? Like, there's an awful lot there's not an awful lot of information to be garnered from this match, and there's nothing to lose from it, which is the great thing. As long as we back the personalities, as long as we back people, just tell them, go from it's like the Any Given Sunday. No one's going to eat your dinner for making a mistake. Just make it big, make it huge. Like, we've got to go after them. And do you know what was really refreshing for me as well? Seeing players play with a smile on their face. And it wasn't just James Lowe, who always has a smile on his face. People they just enjoyed the freedom of kind of going, actually, I can just go and have a little wander here. I can have a little cook. You see Keenan going for the 50-22s. There's players' personalities starting to come out in a game, and like when I played in teams, big personalities, they're usually the guys who put in 70% of the teamwork, but then when the opportunity arises, they're clinical and they're efficient and they're absolutely selfishly driven for the betterment of the team. And I think the more of that we have, because you have that with New Zealand, you're going to have Bowden Barrett again. He went for 2 intercepts against Wales.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and just went, there was space for Wales to go somewhere else, but New Zealand squeezed them. That showed them different pictures, and Barrett just shoots in through for the for two intercepts. And Reese's try in the second half, you just like, where does that come from? But these guys are just like, yeah, it's straight off the training pitch. If we can get to a place where players feel like it's a game, it's a training session, and stuff always works in training. That's what seems to be the difference between New Zealand and the rest of the world. And if we can start, we've taken the first step there. I think the courage now is, the hard bit is taking the next step, because it's the fear of what might happen against New Zealand. But that's the difference between New Zealand players and Irish players. And the wrap up now is, it's the top 2 inches. We can all pass, we can kick, we can make decisions just the same as them, but they do it more regularly at under the most intense pressure.
Fellas, really interesting. Going to be a cracking game Saturday. Let's see what happens. Thanks so much for the time, much appreciated. Andy Dunne, Gordon D'Arcy, thanks fellas.
Thanks, Andy.
Cheers. And by the way, tickets, needless to say, in hot demand for Saturday. We're giving away 3 for that game on Saturday. To be in with a chance of winning, just identify our mystery voice, concerned as the winter sets in that he's looking a bit pasty.
I need you to bring some more fake tan over for me.
Your name and answer please to 53106 for 30 cent, and we'll call the winner back after the show.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in. This week on News Talk, we're celebrating Science Week, supported by Science Foundation Ireland. Running from November 7th to 14th, Science Week 2021 is supporting the Government of Ireland's Creating Our Future campaign. An opportunity to submit your idea for what scientists could explore to create a better country for us all. We'll be speaking with experts from the worlds of STEM, innovation and sustainability, and exploring ideas that will have a positive impact in our future lives. Follow the movement on air and online at newstalk.com/Science Week.
That sound, that boom, that's life happening right now. One beat after the next. What's next is what Leia Healthcare do. Giving you access to more hospitals, consultants, and urgent care clinics so you never miss a beat. We're always evolving, never still, making you better before you're even ill. It's healthcare on your terms, always one beat ahead. And that's how Leia Healthcare are looking after you, always.
Insurance provided by Elips Insurance Limited, trading as Leia Healthcare. Leia Healthcare Limited, trading as Leia Healthcare and Leia Life, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. Additional access is dependent on holding private medical insurance. Urgent care available to over 12 months. Consultants subject to their availability.
Support Irish retail by shopping with Ireland's #1 online store, mixgarage.com. With guaranteed next day delivery across a massive range of items, you'll find everything you need for your car, home, garden, staycation and so much more. Sign up to our sale alerts to access exclusive discounts and get €5